Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special Uncoachable episode where we're going to talk about the future of Overwatch Esports, what it means for us, what it means for all the different regions, and what the next year really looks like as we go through. So we can jump straight in here, I think, and start looking at the announcement that came out on the 23rd. And the big headline was the Overwatch Champions Series, the OWCS. And they talked about the North American and European region in one format and the Asian region in another format. So just to kind of catch everyone up to speed, the North American and European format looked very much like a Swiss system into a group stage, into a knockout tournament, maybe a very classic tournament format that a lot of teams use. And then the winner of this would get tournament points to hopefully qualify for some big mid-season and end-of-year events. But the details on that weren't all there quite yet. So we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, in the Asia region, it was a lot more divided in terms of we would have a Korean region, a Japanese qualifier, a Pacific qualifier, and these things would all filter into a round robin or a double elim, depending on the region. And then that would filter into, again, a sort of like minor tournament final between all the regions. And again, these teams would filter into the big international events. And there was going to be 2 international events, one in the middle of the year in May and one at the end of the year in November. That would be like, I guess, like the grand finals of the whole region. So I guess we can maybe just start there with the sort of bare bones of the tournament format and the announcement in terms of how we think this will work and if we think it's good compared to some of the other formats we've experienced.
Yeah, my feeling is that we look at it in 2 ways, right? There is like one way of like, do we think it's like competitively good, right? So like as a competitor, then there's also this like, I guess like slightly more selfish point of view of like the professional aspect of it. Like, do we think we will be able to earn like secure employment from this? I feel like just competitive in terms of format, I think it's pretty positive. I feel like we're going to be playing Overwatch in high stakes-ish games for most of the year, depending on how they fill those few months break. So I think just the raw format, I think it's actually it's okay. I don't think I would prefer it another way. I think the fact it's open, what do you call it, open
Qualification.
Yeah, anyone can get in. I think it's probably objectively a good thing. I think those qualifiers, everyone will look forward to it every month. So I feel like the actual overall system and format on a month-to-month basis looks okay to me.
We can look at oh, go on, Max.
No, I mean, I think that overall, like competitively, it looks fine. And, they finally like patched the gap where it was like, we've just had months of kind of nothing. If you could call Flash Ops something, then, that's optimistic, I suppose. But, like lots of pros weren't even playing in that first Flash Ops. But I guess this gives people like a more serious structure to actually look at and think like, okay, this can be my professional job for the remainder of the year. The pros can look at this and be like, okay, we need to make teams to play in this. And this is going to last us for a long period of time.
Yeah. They said oh, no more off seasons, but from what I can see, last time I checked that there is my calendar where I'm from, maybe it's different for you guys. It does go from November to like there is a few months on this calendar that seems to be missing. So I feel like there will be a big question mark over certain aspects, like how do we fill the June and July month? Is that going to be the Esports World Cup? Because I was on their website and they say they're doing it in July, and that's like the big rumor, right? That's why there's a 2-month break, so they can do that. Will there be a Blizzard World Cup? It's actually interesting because I feel like it was successful, but if we're already doing stuff in November, then maybe it's tough. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like at least we're going to get to play a lot of Overwatch across the season,
Yeah, I think it's definitely a no off seasons calendar. Like they might not write the Esports World Cup in the June-July section for whatever reason, but it's like the unspoken format filler, like they all know what is going in there. Yeah, you could draw a KSA flag there in the middle, you can call it Esports.
Try and draw it. See how close you get.
Draw it. Yeah. The special's going to overrun if we have to sit here and wait for me to draw like a suitable representation of that flag that can be recognized.
Yeah, no, I guess it might be up there in terms of complexity. Given it's actually got some words on it, but
I can only do stripes, mate. Only stripes.
So yeah, I feel like the overall system, like I feel like at least for me, what I was thinking was I was like, I really want to qualify for the LANs, right? If I'm going to play this, those are the 2, the DreamHack in Dallas and the DreamHack in Sweden. It feels top heavy. I don't know if you guys feel the same, but it feels like in this new format, it's very much winner takes all. Maybe one thing the Overwatch League did do was it meant that regardless of where you finish within the league, there's a certain level of income, security, you get to play all the games. This time it feels like if you're one of the top 2 or 3 teams, then you can kind of take everything. But if you're not, it looks a little bit rough.
I'd say that. I know you go first.
I was going to say, in Overwatch League, you'd also get tiers, right? In the sense that everyone would obviously be excited to see Atlanta and Florida play and who's going to be the best team and all of this, Houston, the sort of elite teams. But then there would be the sort of top 4. Are Boston going to be the 4th best team? Can Toronto take it? Can Vancouver take it? Who's going to get in play-ins? Can London turn their season around? Will Valiant or Vegas end up finishing bottom? There's actually like a variety of storylines all the way down. Whereas I feel like, especially maybe like a Swiss system, it's just from a like spectator point of view, I imagine it's not going to be a super interesting week of Overwatch, this first one, for example.
Yeah, for sure. It was very similar to maybe what Flash Ops was, where if people stream their POVs, it can be kind of fun to like. That's one thing that they'll have to decide. I think that they're just going to go fully open, like co-streaming. Everyone can stream their POVs. I really don't see. I don't see anyone buying the licensing rights like YouTube did, but I feel like they're very much going to let this be as open as possible to the public in terms of the streaming and the co-streaming.
Yeah, I'm interested to see like the rule set from Faceit to see whether people can stream their POVs, because I do think that like the likelihood of people streaming their POVs definitely goes down when you have a more structured format like this. You know, when it was like Flash Ops and it was all a bit Mickey Mouse, everyone's like, I'm happy to stream my POV, but like this stuff, it counts for a lot more, you know, like it's building towards something. So people are immediately going to get a lot more serious in terms of like hiding their strategies and, you know, just not wanting other people to see what they're doing and watch their matches. You know, you might see the people that are like, you know, they're money driven and they're hungry for it, making it work. But I don't know. We'll see. It also depends on the rule set for sure, because it might just not allow it. Not really too sure there.
Yeah, it's possible also that the good teams have so few games where it's actually competitive. Like if you look at this format that X has on the screen right now, let's say you're the best team in Europe or America. Like if you're playing all of the Swiss stage, you should just auto win, unless you're like my team and you can barely scrape through the Swiss system qualification. Then even when you get to the groups, you're going to be in a seed with like the 9th or the 13th best team in your region. That in theory, like the difference between the best team and the 13th team is so monumental that it is just effectively like a foregone conclusion. So it really is only until you get to week 4 that teams are going to genuinely have like competitive competition, you feel like. So maybe that opens it up to streaming those first 3 weeks a lot more.
Yeah, just you're talking about like the top heavy nature of it. I don't know if I should like jump into that yet or not, but for sure, like with this new system, it like a lot of players will just get nothing anymore. You know, a lot of people will get significantly less, because now it looks like the format that's coming through, I mean, because it's not a league format or whatever, it's incentivized predominantly by pricing, you know? So if you're not cleaning up in the pricing department, you're probably not going to be earning much money at all. Whereas like with the Overwatch League, regardless of your level of performance, you were guaranteed a salary and things like that. You know, people like coaches, they were never guaranteed a particular salary, but it seemed like most teams, they paid the player minimum for a coach at worst, you know? Maybe towards the end they got it. Yeah, unless you're Danny, you know, unless you're me on Atlanta in 2021. But you know, for the most part, people had decent pay in Overwatch League and a lot of benefits associated with it. But now that it's going to this like open circuit format where, you know, orgs are probably going to get involved, but how much money are these orgs actually going to spend when they get involved? Because it's definitely not going to be Overwatch League salary bucks. You know, you're not going to see team houses throughout America with, you know, 10 different teams in NA trying to compete for this tournament right here. Like it's just not going to happen. Yeah, I'd be surprised if we see any teams with housing.
Only Toronto will do. That's what I was going to say. I fucking Toronto for sure. They'll have Kasaurus has got his documents on the wall of the Toronto team house. They love a team house. But I think you're right. I think that the prize pool is the most interesting thing to think about, because if the prize pool is big, that also incentivizes orgs, which also like doubles our income, you know. So I feel like the prize pool is like, that's what's important.
And that's probably the key piece of information that has been missing from this announcement. I feel like we got a lot, but the actual prize pool is what's going to dictate, especially the orgs' involvement, or if any orgs do want to get involved. Because if there's no way for them to sort of see a way to make money or make a return, they're not going to start paying people's salaries in the same way the Overwatch League teams were forced to.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I think what Max is saying is true, that actually I suppose it depends how you look at it. Like, how many teams in Europe are going to really get like salaried or prize pool? Like, I suppose Overwatch historically has only had 20 teams that get paid, right? Because of the Overwatch League. If you then combine that by 3 regions, then maybe there's like 3 in America, 3 in Europe, 3 or 4 in Korea. Maybe half the amount of people that could feasibly do this as their job is gone. Like, only half can continue to do it. And I suspect that the fucking carpes, the giga millionaires, there's no such thing as that in Overwatch anymore. That, like, even if you're the highest paid player in Overwatch, unless you say win the Saudi the Esports World Cup and you have like an insane prize pool split, I actually think that for most people, we're never going to reach the same heights of financial compensation that they would get in the league. But that's also reasonable, right? Because the league was fucking hemorrhaging money at an outrageous rate. Like, for Overwatch to be sustainable, that the salaries have to actually make sense. Like, companies and orgs and Blizzard actually have to be able to make some semblance of a profit. And if that wasn't the case in Overwatch League, then even though we were getting more money and stuff, it wasn't going to last.
I think even when you look at some of the org or some of the other games that match, like if you start to look at this calendar or this system and start comparing it to Dota or CS or League, you're probably just also dreaming in terms of the scale of those games compared to where Overwatch is right now. The real comparison is probably more games like Rocket League or Halo or
Rainbow Six, something like that, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think if you start to look at how many orgs are actually, like, even if you look at some of the big Halo events, for example, well, actually, most of the teams going to those events do have an org. But there's only a handful of, like, I don't want to call them like proper orgs, or like the Cloud9 or FaZe type orgs. But then you hit like the more like, I don't know what you call it. Like, I don't want to say passion project. That seems maybe a bit disrespectful.
I know what
like,
you mean. Yeah.
They're sort of like scraping by trying to get a team together. And then there is still a handful of teams in the qualifiers who are just a group of mates with a funny name and a funny image as their logo type team, still trying to like fight and get in. And I think that's maybe what you're going to start seeing a lot more from this. Well, maybe, I mean, if we get 1 or 2 or 3 like recognizable names or orgs involvement per region, I think that's probably actually good for where we are.
I mean, to be fair, I was doing a bit of research. It feels like Overwatch's like viewership, it's pretty comparable, if not slightly better than some of the games you mentioned, but we were also doing it on YouTube, right? So the fact that we were averaging like 30, 40K on YouTube, maybe it's like, it's in a slightly better like position. I saw something the other day that said that like Overwatch has like 50 million unique players every month. So I feel like the actual player base is really strong. The fan base is, it's definitely not one of the big dogs, but I also think it's in a decent spot where orgs could get involved.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that like for the longest time, Overwatch has been a bit of a tier 2 esport in terms of its viewership and popularity. But like we've all just been on tier 1 esport wages for the longest time. Is the long
cash him a paycheck. He'll keep
pretty
coming,
much.
Right?
I mean, I'm happy to keep. I'm happy to keep cashing a paycheck if it exists, but this is basically the adjustment to Overwatch being a tier 2 esport, where the viewership just isn't that high. So there is no organization other than Toronto Defiant that's going to pay that into Casaurus's pocket. There's no organization that's going to give people that amount of money, is my understanding, basically. So I mean, it's a tough adjustment for a lot of people to make, I suppose. But I guess it's where it was at.
Yeah, that's what it is. Unfortunately, we live in a fully capitalistic society, whereas you can only get paid what you're worth, and I think
unfortunately the free market has decided that we're all fucking worthless.
Yeah, that's unfortunately, but
who told them? Fuck.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
There's probably an argument as well when you actually look at Overwatch League and the number of North American and European people employed within orgs. Would there even be a huge shift when we talk about like the top X amount of European teams will get enough money out of prize money, the top X amount of American teams will get enough money out of prize money? Is there actually a massive shift there in terms of player number?
Yeah, I think there is a real argument that if you are, say you're the best or like the second best or like a top 5 American or European player, this is actually a way better format for you, I think, in terms of you might earn a little bit more money, especially if orgs do get involved. You're at least going to compete higher. I think the people that obviously get shafted are the Koreans, because in this situation where there was 20 teams, Koreans could take every spot, and they really try to, whereas it feels like with like import rules, I think one thing to consider is that there is import rules, but my instinct is that imports are going to be pretty rare. I think it's way harder to get a visa without the Overwatch League, because the Overwatch League, Blizzard did a lot to help the visa process. So unless teams are going to do some dodgy dealings where they put people on travel visas, I feel like that the Korean imports won't be as common as maybe people expect.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it's also just like, if they can't Yeah, it's
Fucking
genuinely only Toronto Defiant. And then like, if people want to play on ping, that's fucking difficult. That's really hard to justify. Like it ain't looking great for those folks.
So it feels like the amount of like Korean players that were getting paid a livable or a above livable salary is gonna, I think it's gonna be like, there might even be as crazy as fucking 10% of them will still be able to earn a living. If you're like one of these players that was playing for like New York or Washington, it's so hard to see you getting a salary at least in the future. And also prize pool because there's so many other good players.
I think we can take a look like in more detail because the Asia region is a little bit more complicated in terms of how they've divided everything. So they've divided it into Korean qualifiers, Japanese qualifiers, and Pacific qualifiers. We'll probably come on to the fact now Australia has been deemed not to exist a little bit later on. But what this also does is, in theory, there are more spots for European and American players in general, even if they're not in like the high money spots. But because this round robin means only 9 Korean teams qualify even to the round robin, and then only 8 teams get to the studio. But it's not 8 teams from all of these. It's only the top 3 Korean teams. So actually, all of a sudden, if you're talking about talking about getting to the regional final, if you're Korean, you have to be on one of the top 3 Korean teams.
Yeah. Which is so hard. There's going to be so many genuine, like world-class Overwatch League talent, which doesn't even qualify for the Korean LAN, And I feel like what you should see, if they're smart, is a mass retirement from a lot of Korean players. Unless you are the tips or the propers, I think that especially if you're like, if you're the like. Okay, I'm not trying to like call people out, but let's say you're Seeker, okay? Seeker is a good example of a player that presumably was only going to play for one of the bottom tier teams in Overwatch League, but will now get probably one of the premier spots in an American organization. If you are, say, I don't know who's like, maybe Yaki isn't the best example, but if you were one of these like
Yaki mentioned,
yeah,
one of even in the special boys, even in the special,
someone like Kellen. I think Kellen's good, but actually, if you're someone like Kellen, even though on paper you should consider yourself a much better player than Seeker. Again, I'm not trying to fucking like get too toxic here. Actually, your ability to get employed just due to the limited positions and the number of competition above you feels so much tougher, to the point where it actually wouldn't surprise me if a lot of Koreans try to play on ping for American teams, but then fuck me, that's difficult for your time zone, for your sleep schedule, for playing on ping. It's soul destroying unless you're actually getting really good money. I think you've said this on the podcast before, Max, but when we were in before the Overwatch League days and we were dealing with all of the like the shitty sleep schedules, the lack of pay, there was always this promise of something bigger. If this is now the best that we can get, I think it looks a lot more difficult for certain people to stay in Overwatch.
I mean, doesn't this, to be honest, this new format announcement, doesn't this feel like what Tier 2 was in maybe 2018, 2019? Because that's what it feels like to me, You're basically a couple of online tournaments throughout the year building towards the equivalent of like a Pacific Showdown and then a Gauntlet, That's when I was a player, 2019, that was the format, You played contenders, that fed into Pacific Showdown, and then, assuming you didn't come last to Pacific Showdown like some Australian team with me on it did, then later on when you came first in your region again, you would go to the Gauntlet. We lost Australia's spot to the Gauntlet by coming last at Pacific Showdown, but not the point. It does feel like what Tier 2 was before. And Overwatch League was concurrently running with this. I don't know what's happened to Tier 2 as a result of this, right? Does Contenders even exist anymore if this is the new system?
This is just, I think everything is open. So
exactly, right?
Yeah, everyone will compete. At the start of the month, if you're like the equivalent of a Contenders team, you will put your team and you will just qualify through Open Division. That's what it used to be called. And you will try to get as far as you can in one of the groups. But for sure, I think Open Division, there's no way it does. I think Calling All Heroes will still exist because that's obviously like a separate thing. But in terms of like the main scene, no Open Division, no Contenders, everything is done through the Overwatch Champion Series. And yeah, I feel like the best some teams will have is, if I get to the group stage, maybe I can finish third in my group, and then next month I can try to progress. It's a little bit shame there's only 4. I feel like if it was monthly and it was like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, teams could really try to improve like month for month. And I feel like for certain players, like the lower, like the Contenders levels players, being able to compete in the main tournament and see how far you can get, I think is quite nice. But yeah, I think for sure, this is everything. What we see, minus maybe the Esports World Cup or the Overwatch World Cup from Blizzard, I think everything we have on our screen right now is everything that you will be able to compete in.
Yeah, just with what's on our screen right now, by the way, you were saying, the top 3 teams in Korea go to the LAN. The top 4 teams in Korea go to the LAN because one of the things is a wild card qualifier, and it's like Japan third versus Pacific third. Maybe I can like transition this into the topic about Australia, but I think like the way that they've done this groups format is just fucking disgraceful, to be honest. Like the fact that Japan gets its own tournament with 9 teams in it, and Pacific gets another team with 8, and Australia is not even included in either of these regions is a fucking joke, because Australia was better than Japan, better than Thailand, you know? And these teams, like they play national teams in the Pacific region, right? So Japan's number 1 team, which is all Japanese, Team Australia was just better than that team, just flat out, you know? Like we would go back and forth with it, you know, sometimes they would win a block, but I'd say we would win majority, and we're playing on a significant ping disadvantage to these guys. And then for the Pacific group, like Thailand was even worse. And Australia didn't beat Japan in the qualifiers, but we trashed Japan in the qualifier. We trashed Thailand in the qualifiers, and Australia's just been removed from this list completely. You know, Japan has a big Overwatch Esports base, which is why it has its own tournament with 9 teams in a round robin. So we're going to see 2 Japanese teams at LAN. But at the end of the day, like this is they're just shitting on ANZ, because ANZ is for sure strong enough to be competing in this bracket that I see there with Japan Pacific. You know, we could absolutely be there, because I think if you put an Australian team in either of the Japanese or the Pacific qualifying events, they would absolutely, without a doubt, come top 2 in either of those brackets. So
Why don't they? I haven't thought about it until you obviously passionately bring it up. But why don't they just let you guys compete in the Pacific online? Like,
no fucking idea. No fucking idea. Genuinely no clue.
The easy answer, right, is like you guys are just in this region, and you can compete.
And even if you have to play in a little bit, you play on a bit higher ping, but fuck it, you know, like we'll do it because we get to compete.
I think they just forgot to fucking shade in the map or something, man. It doesn't make any sense. Like maybe it's something to do with costs of flights or visas or something like that, even though Australia has a stronger passport than basically every fucking Pacific nation. So there's no way that that's the case for going to Korea for a LAN. Like there's no way.
Is it flight costs?
Maybe I really don't know, but it just makes no sense, and it's really fucking insulting to the ANZ region, which has genuinely contributed fucking heaps to Overwatch Esports over the years. Like so many characters, excluding myself, the number 1 Australian personality ever to come out of OCE, but so many people in Overwatch League, Overwatch Esports in general, have come from the ANZ region, and they just shit on them. They just forget about them in the announcement, and then you see a tweet from the product lead a little bit later being like, we're looking at solutions here, or we're thinking about what we're going to do here. It's like you just fucking announced the tournament circuit for the entire year, and you just forgot ANZ. And then I look at this tournament format right here, and it's like I see 4 teams from Japan and Pacific, and it's like Australia's top 1 in that group of 4. Like, what's going on here? It's nonsense.
And then there's good news can't be for competitive reasons. It has to be some sort of logistical or incompetence-based region. Like obviously China isn't competing, but I feel like the China reason is totally different, right? Like that's like a licensing issue. It makes sense. Like China would be in if they were able to play the game at this moment in time. But yeah, it's actually really weird that they wouldn't, because it feels like it's such a no-brainer. Just let them compete in the Pacific. Or
what does it change? What's the downside of not letting Australia in, right? What's so horrible that we need to keep these people out or keep them away from our precious championship series?
Yeah, because I'm trying to think where else in the world is like fully excluded. Like, because even if you're in the Middle East or Africa, you can compete through EMEA, right? Like that's what EMEA stands for.
Yeah.
I think
and presumably, if you're South American, if you're Brazilian, can you compete in?
Yeah, there's a detailed list of which countries are included and not included in each region. But I think all of the South American ones are included in the North American region, essentially. So there's no other major countries, I believe, that are excluded except for Australia. I mean, I have seen some people complaining from the South American contingent that, well, it's a little bit fucked for them because they've had no form of support for so many years, and now they suddenly get to come back in, but they have to compete with the top American teams, which means the regions have just, the skill difference has just gone up over time because of the lack of support for South America, and now they're just getting thrown into that region. But Australia seems to be the only one that is genuinely excluded for no obvious, we can talk about the China situation a little bit more because it's like a unique situation, but at least there's like an obvious reason why that's happened. The Australia one is really, really bizarre.
Yeah, just very unexpected. And it's not like this personally affects me either. It's not like I was actually intending to go and compete in the OCE region, really. Like that wasn't my long-term thinking.
I thought you were making a comeback, mate.
Oh, I mean, I guess I could coach the rank 1 Australian team, put together an Australian team, and then make it to the LAN. Actually, through the Pacific group. So, if I wanted to, make a couple of $100 over the course of the year and get a free flight to Korea in the middle of it, like there could have been a pathway there, right? Play through Pacific. But now I've had even that, my free mid-year holiday to Korea, ripped away from me because I can't even get that. So really, I'm devastated by Blizzard on that front, because I would rather send the second place seed from the Pacific region minus Japan. Like, get out of here, man.
Good news for Japan, though.
I mean, it's a great day to be a Japanese Overwatch fan, dude. You get 2 teams represented at the APAC mega tournament. Like,
if you scroll down on that, does it say the list of countries that are not allowed to?
No, you have to do a process of elimination, because I think maybe the Bahamas was left off this list as well, technically, but I think that was maybe just a genuine oversight of their existence rather than a.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is, like, especially with the South America one, there is like an element of practicality where if the scene isn't that big and the competition isn't that strong, Blizzard isn't going to throw a prize pool and a production for it. But it really feels like with the Australia, unless it's just they don't want to have to do an English broadcast. But I feel like even if you offer, I feel like right now, if you say to Australian players, listen, you have to play on like Pacific servers against like Thailand, and we're not going to cast your games in English. Do you still want to be included? I think they're still like, well, yeah, okay. Like, it's not ideal, but it's better than.
I mean, it's like what language are they going to do for the Pacific broadcast? It's not like there's a universal language in Southeast Asia, like the Pacific region isn't united by one language, So if there's not going to be an English broadcast, what language is going to be for the Pacific broadcast?
I mean, yeah.
If anything, English is actually the best language to put it in.
That's the closest to a universal language there, right? Like, so I really don't follow the reasoning behind Australia just being fucking missing from the announcement.
There's also precedent for this, right? Like, it's not like Australia have never been included in the Pacific region before. Or
Australia's had its own tournaments for ages. And they've rolled Australia into the Pacific thing for the international events. Like, they have you play against the Pacific teams with the ping equalizer to qualify. Yeah. Like, there's really nothing new for all of
this. Yeah, and I don't know. So I feel like they must address it, because I feel like the line so far has very much just been Australians will count as import players, and that is the situation at the moment. But
I feel like no one's importing Australian players, right? Like, no disrespect, but if you're going to use an import slot, you might as well get one of those Korean fellas instead.
Well, it maybe does open up,
right?
Well, I guess it does open up some degree. Like, how people like Kufa or something would play in North American contenders. It maybe opens up like at least that pathway for teams who wouldn't be able to attract a Korean import anyway. Potentially, can just use some of the top Australian players to bolster their roster.
No, I reckon every single team in Japan and PAC, except for like maybe the top Japanese team, because of the whole, maybe the top couple of Japanese teams, because they're just like full Japanese teams. I think a lot of these teams are just going to have 2 Korean players on them, like all the time. Like, that's what the Pacific region used to be before they had the roster locks come in. It was like full Korean teams and like Korean padded out teams to the absolute maximum of the import limit every single time. And I imagine it's just going to go back to that. Like, I look at this format and I think, Koreans are going to be super, super, super starved for a slot. You're basically going to have top 4, and then everyone else is completely wasting their time earning $0 a year. For sure, they're going to flow off into Pacific and Japan. Like, they're going to look for their best shot to make it a top 2 team. And they'll probably be able to do that, right? Because a 5th place Korean contenders team, sorry, not Korean contenders, a 5th place Korean team, period, because tier 2 and tier 1 have just been merged with this format. If you're 5th place on the best Korean, in like a completely competitive Korean format, 100% you're going to be the best player on your Pacific team. Like 100%. There's no doubt, like that region, it's not, there might be some hidden gems in there, but at the same time, like, Korea is still just so fucking dominant from a talent perspective that I'd say maybe 90% you'll be your best player on your Pacific team.
Yeah, sure.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think this maybe kind of brings us on to the import rule in general then? So the roster limit announcement is your roster limit size total is 8. You're allowed 2 import players, which is basically anyone not from the region. But when we're talking with a sense of realism here, we're mainly talking about which people and which regions can bring in Korean talents. And this obviously solves the, I don't know if you would call it the Overwatch League problem, but where you might have a Houston Outlaws team that's entirely Korean, or Atlanta Reign that's entirely Korean or something. You now get true regional representation from all the teams coming from the region, unless you're Australian, of course. But but it means we're now stuck on an import limit 2. In general, I feel like this is a good thing, though. Like, it at least it allows the talent to still come over if it is there, even though I think this first year especially we'll see no imports really outside of the
Yeah.
Asia region. But I feel like in general the import rule is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe one day we'll do a special episode about why the Overwatch League failed. And I do feel like that the fact that the league was so heavily Korean and most of them didn't speak English did have an effect on certain on like the fan base in general. I think it was harder to do content. It was harder to have like players that were accessible, at least from like a Western perspective. And I feel like if you did let imports go fully wild, if there was ever a world in which a Toronto could just import a full Korean roster and win, then you might see the mid-season tournament being full Korean again. Which, you know, might in theory bring the best Overwatch, but also I think that would probably fall into some of the same problems. Like I feel like if you look at League of Legends, the reason these international events are so exciting is because you don't get to see these teams play against each other except for that. And I don't know how you guys feel. Maybe I'm coping, but I feel this idea that the Koreans are just going to auto win is a little bit naive. Like I think that there is a chance that some of these like Western superstar teams that are stacked enough to compete with some of the Korean teams, especially if something like the World Cup happens where the Korean and the Asian teams are so blind towards the meta that they just think, oh, like, because what's going to happen now, and this is what I fucking guarantee, is Europe, no matter what the patches, is going to play Brawl, no matter what. We're past the stage of Overwatch where people think that they can learn other comps. Europeans know they can't dive. It's just a fact of nature. And I feel like the same happens the other way, where I really think that no matter what the patch, you're going to see some sort of Winston dive from these Korean teams. In the same way that Saudi and Finland were able to beat the Asian teams in the World Cup, if the meta is actually not dive and these Asian teams come into it brainwashing themselves into thinking only dive comes in, or just in general haven't got any good practice against Brawl, I think that European and American teams can upset them. And I think that if each region has its own twist on the meta, which I think is inevitable, I think it's totally inevitable, I don't see a single European team touching a dive tank except for maybe the team that has Kevster on it. Like, I think that actually you might start to see international tournaments are quite exciting because not only do you get to see players that don't play against each other, but you also get to see like a genuine meta differences. I guarantee the metas are different from region to region. And I think that opens up to genuine upset possibilities. Maybe I'm naive because I feel like everyone thinks, oh, the two Korean teams are just going to go in and win. But South Korea lost to both Finland and Saudi Arabia when they misread the meta with the most stacked team in the tournament, you know?
And all due respect to that team Finland as well. Like you can maybe make like the argument with Saudi Arabia that actually they had some super talented players, but this Finland team wasn't super stacked by any means, and they were still able to take down some of the biggest names we had this year in Overwatch League.
Yeah, I think that like it also from a viewership standpoint, it's just like way more interesting to see like a clash of the regions every now and then, rather than just see the same teams playing each other over and over and over again. I think that people really sleep on the fact that like a bit of nationalism actually makes people way more interested and incentivized to watch games, gamble on games, get hyped about games. It's like if you watch like any international like league tournament or anything like that, the chat is just like perma, like EU greater than Korea, EU greater than NA greater than whatever, you know? It's just like people shit posting about the region that's winning and the region that's losing. But you never see that in Overwatch because the groups are so homogenized, you know? Like everyone is just playing with everyone all the time, you know? Occasionally you get a full Korean team winning the league about 50% of the time, maybe more. But overall, like the Overwatch League was so homogenized because, you know, the import stuff, it was just a bunch of people living in Los Angeles and then living in the United States. So I think for sure it'll be a better viewing experience if it's actually like regional tournaments into big feeder event in the middle, because it makes the feeder event way more hype than what any Overwatch League event could ever possibly be. Because with an Overwatch League event, 90% of the time, you've already seen these fucking teams play each other anyway.
Yeah, and they're all scrimming against each other, and there was almost nothing left to I think you're right.
There's no surprises. Like that's why the World Cup was so much better.
Exactly. That's why everything about the World Cup, the reason it always is that like Overwatch's best viewership is always the World Cup more than the Overwatch League, is because the French fans will get behind the French team and the Japanese fans will get behind the Japanese team. And I think that having that regional event, I think it's so hype. Like those two events will be really, really fun, more than any Overwatch League event, in my opinion. Even if the overall average level of play is worse, I think it's so much more exciting to see the top European, the top American, and the top Korean team play. And I think that also, you're right, I think the fact that we have that incentive of those international lands makes the qualifiers actually really exciting too. Like to see who squeezes into that third spot on however they do it in like tournament points, whatever, I think is also really exciting. So like we said at the start, I feel like the actual like the competitive format of this season, I think, is pretty spot on. There's almost nothing I would change. I think you could probably make an argument that Korean was hard done to because they only get 2 teams to travel to the LAN instead of 3. That's the same, I guess, the same argument as Australia, where on merit Australia should be in, on merit Korea should have more slots going to the event than NA and EU. But again, that's probably some logistical issue of where, well, listen, the events are held in Europe and America, and it's much easier for us to fly them out and blah blah blah.
Yeah. I think it's super unfair that the Koreans are not getting 3 slots. NA and EU are both like definitively weaker regions of Korea if you like average out all the players.
Yeah.
Like I think even like outside of top 2 for NA and EU, you're going to see like a big skill drop off.
I agree. I think the third seed team from both EU and NA is going to be considerably weaker than the first seed, and obviously the Korean third seed would be so much stronger than the European third seed.
Yeah.
But my feeling is it can't have been done on merit. There has to be like a logistical reason why they only allowed Korea to have 2. But yeah, I think if you're a Korean fan,
more people to Europe from Europe than it is from Asia.
That's probably
for clarity for anyone who, because it wasn't in the official announcement, but for clarity for everyone, it's for both these like international events. It's going to be 3 teams from America, 3 teams from Europe and the Middle East, and then 2 teams from Asia, presumably the 2 Japanese teams. But
yeah, that would be my guess.
Here's the tweet for it, if you were wondering. I think another thing that's kind of crazy is just you'll get this tweet up, I suppose. I think it's kind of crazy, low key. You scroll up that they don't include information like this in the announcement, but they have it. Like they know the split that is going to be. They know how many teams are going to be at DreamHack. They know the split regionally, but somehow they forget to include that information in the announcement. And the only way that it comes out is because MBA Albert posts the most asinine general thoughts about the initial announcement, and the product lead for the new format sees it and replies with like little nuggets of information bit by bit. Like if you follow Albert on Twitter and you dig through the replies of his tweets, then it turns out that you're actually just going to find out incredibly crucial information about the DreamHack tournament that they forgot to include in the initial announcement. Like this announcement took how long? Like we've been waiting for like what?
Information next week, guys.
Yeah, we've been waiting for so fucking long, and the announcement is still semi-incomplete. Like you have to get half of the information for the tournament from Twitter replies, and then we still don't know the prize money in it.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty like everyone is. Maybe this is the time for me to start going like super doomer, or do you have some more to say about the rest of it before I just go super negative?
Go for it.
Hit it.
Okay. I think everyone is just being like so positive and happy about this because they're just starved for content. People have been waiting so long, like hoping to Christ that they will get some work again and get some Overwatch to watch again. And then finally it's been announced. And like from my perspective, like what they've announced, it sucks. Like I think genuinely what I'm looking at right now, it sucks compared to what was on last year. But everyone is talking about this like it's the bee's knees, like it's the best thing ever. But I look at it just like from an objective standpoint, and I really feel like this is just tier 2 and tier 1 merged into what was basically the same thing, but less of everything. I think the only people that are going to be happy with this format in 6 months are the teams that are in top 2 NA, top 2 Korea, top 2 EU. And anyone else that isn't in the top 6 in the entire world is going to be definitively unhappy with it. Because I think that the amount of money that people are going to be able to earn in it is going to be way lower. And just overall, the benefits that you get from being a pro Overwatch League player, an Overwatch player, they're no longer existent unless you're a real, true winner in your region. And I think like it's fair for this to occur, right? I'm not saying that it's unfair that this is happening. We were talking about free market before and how Overwatch League, like overall, they were overpaying everyone. But I think it's really interesting to see that so many people from Overwatch League are tweeting about this stuff positively now. Like they're high on the hope and the cope that they're going to get to keep a job, but like nobody's getting to keep a job. That like it really just doesn't look like it's going to exist anymore. Because I look at this tournament format and I think like there's like 6 jobs in the world at most.
Yeah.
Like if you're a coach, there's at most 6 jobs in the world. So like, how can that be a positive when before last year there was 19 Overwatch League teams, which usually had assistant coaches, more than one coach. The year before that, they had even more coaches and there were 20 teams instead of 19, like you got to live overseas, you got to get housing, you got this cool experience. This time around, if you're not in the top 6 in the world or top 8 in the world, plus 2 Mickey Mouse NA and EU teams, you're basically getting nothing forever for being a pro Overwatch player now. So I think that the value judgment has like massively shifted on whether it's worthwhile to be a pro, to pursue pro Overwatch generally. But it feels like nobody's acknowledging this because they're all just so happy that finally they announced something.
Yeah, I feel like the reason I was optimistic about it is maybe because I come from a slightly biased position. Because, yeah, I feel like if I want to compete in this, I might get to be on one of those like top few teams if I'm lucky. But I also feel like in my head it was like, you're right, everything is worse than Overwatch League, but I think that was almost like I buried that. I thought there was no way that my life was going to be better than Overwatch League this year. I felt like this format that they announced was maybe better than what I expected, or maybe it filled me with more hope than what I initially thought. And I don't know what they could have done except bring back the Overwatch League that would have necessarily made me happier with the format than I am now.
Well,
yeah.
I feel like the format is good, kind of what we talked about at the start of the video. Now, the actual tournament structure, it works like it's a sort of a tried and tested system, and we kind of knew Blizzard at various times have done systems like this with the gauntlet and stuff. But I do feel Hunter has a point in terms of where are the fucking jobs, right? Because that's the real health of the industry, and that's why the prize pool being missing from this announcement is actually crucial. Because this is a really solid tournament structure. Cool. But this isn't a business plan. This is just a tournament schedule. What we want, really, or especially us, maybe as people who work in this specific industry, is how do we get a job? How do we attract orgs to our game to support it? Because all these games we talk about in terms of like Halo or Rocket League, they do have org support, and there's enough finances behind it to lure them in to get them to invest. But there's nothing in this announcement that I think really makes orgs like stand up and take notice of this.
Yeah, I feel like the business logistics, maybe we can pass it over to our MBA master's degree in business, but I feel like the idea of the reasons orgs would get involved in Overwatch or in esports in general, probably three things, right? The game has a high enough viewership where advertising a team on that platform seems like a good value for money. The prize pool is significant enough to when the org takes 50% of the prize pool, there is some like decent return on investments. And then maybe there is some sort of in-game skin revenue share system, right? I feel like the third one isn't going to happen. I don't think Blizzard are putting fucking Cloud9 skins in the game for this. Like that Blizzard, when the Overwatch League was a thing, Blizzard hated fucking giving us anything. Skins, sprays. It took us forever to get anything. Like, no way that we're getting any rev share. But I feel like compared to some of the esports we talk about, has Overwatch League viewership been high enough to attract the Rocket League tier investment? I think so. I think that actually we had a relatively healthy scene. Maybe it's one of those things where because we always had drops on, we maybe hyperinflate how many people watch the Overwatch League for any reason apart from drops. That's really possible, right? But I suppose they could throw drops on this one again.
I think they did say the drops are coming back. So.
Yeah, so maybe those numbers, and then the prize pool, right? This is the main thing. If they say they offer 100k, 150k total prize pool for each region per event, I think orgs are going to jump back in on this, even a relatively minimum thing. Because if I can sign the number one North American team and I can offer them 2 to 3k a month salary, but then I make most of that back if they win the tournament, and on top of that I get org representation, I get advertiser representation, I think that this actually is one of those where certain orgs will come back in. If the prize pool is like flash ups or lower, where actually the prize pool split, even if I'm the winning team, is less than a month's salary that people would expect. One thing I will say is, maybe I'm not the only one in this call who's experienced this, but sometimes organizations will offer you a base salary that is well below the minimum wage, right? I was offered a job from a team that was less than half if I just worked a 9-to-5 job in England. So there is a base level of salary that you can offer players and coaches and teams to where it's worth their while. I think for all of us, we're now grown adult men. If I get less than minimum wage, I'm not doing this job because I have a family to feed. I have to prioritize myself. But if the prize pool is high enough to where it makes the threshold for giving these players 2 to 3k a month and can still bring in enough prize pool and advertiser split, I think from a business perspective, orgs would want to be involved. Even if it's a break-even thing, I feel like orgs would try to be involved in a game like Overwatch.
I think if we want some numbers to compare as well, so I'm looking up the Rocket League equivalent, right? Because I feel like to be fair to Rocket League, I think it's probably one of the bigger tier 2 esports. But they have what is probably a vaguely comparable system where there's a series of regional qualifiers and then there is a big international major, and they have 2 majors a year. So for the regional tournaments, we're really talking like 21k for first place, 12k for second place, 6.3k for third place. But once we get to the actual major itself, we're talking, let's see, it's like 300k for first place, 150k for second place, and even if you come 16th in the Rocket League major, you're getting 12k as a team. Bearing in mind these are 3-people teams as well, right? So it's a much less people to share it around. So actually, those numbers, like I don't think we're going to hit those numbers, for example, especially in this first year.
No,
You don't think we can compete with Rocket League?
No, not when I look at these numbers. I don't think we're about to get this level of investment.
I think the saving grace for Overwatch, if you consider like an org's impact, is the rumors on the street, and this is just internal rumors, is that if the Esports World Cup does come in and does bring Overwatch along, that the prize pool is outrageous. People are telling me 5 million. I feel like that's high, but I want to say this actually. I said this on one of our very first podcasts, like episode 1 or 2. I think that Esports World Cup might have a bigger prize pool than the Overwatch League entire season. That seems to be what people are suggesting. If that's the case, then what we actually have is more of a Dota system where we have this one absolutely gigantic tournament where the prize pool is really important. And if you can field a team that competes for that and pay them an average salary, you make your money back tenfold, right? Like if there is let's say for example, maybe this is too high, but let's say it's a 5 million prize pool for the Esports World Cup. Let's say the winning team gets 2 million. If I salary the best team in the world and I give them all 3,000 a month, if they go and win that event, I've probably made the entire team's salary back in that one tournament, and anything they win on top of that is an advantage. So I think if Overwatch does get announced for the Esports World Cup, which by the way, if you look at the calendar and there's that big gap in June and July, that's on the website. It says July. I'm just saying that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's possible, right? If that gets announced for Overwatch, there is a huge incentive for orgs to field a team that wins that event. And even if you give the players like 50% of the prize pool split between them and you take 50%, which I think is pretty standard, right? Some orgs were more stingy and took like 80%. Some orgs take less, but 50% I feel is average based on what my lived experience. You take 50%, you make 1 million. Hey, if I win that event and make $1 million or $500,000, I can afford to salary these guys all year as long as they keep on like competing in that tournament. So I think that in terms of org support, if that big one, that the international of Overwatch comes in, I would be shocked if orgs aren't making a team for it. And if it becomes a situation where teams only make a team for that event and they salary them massively, then maybe that's the way it goes. But yeah, that's my feeling, is that with the format is announced right now, I think it looks difficult to see orgs getting back in for at least a significant amount of money. If you then quadruple the amount of prize pool across the annual prize pool for Overwatch Esports, maybe it's a totally different ball game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I wouldn't be nearly as doomer about everything to do with this announcement if there was just information, right? But I'm kind of at the point where my feeling is just that, you know, if there's no information, it's probably not good news, right? Like they're probably not still fucking throwing darts at the board, you know, trying to figure out, are we going to pay them $1 million? Or are we going to pay them $5 million for these tournaments, you know? And if the information isn't there, then, you know, I feel like maybe they're trying to build up hype by, you know, putting out all the information except for the prize money. And then once people have all read about the positive news about it, then they won't react so negatively to the fact that there's about 15 cents in it per player. If stuff like the Esports World Cup really is this absurd amount of money up for grabs for people, that I think, again, like the negativity from me goes down even more, because then you've got, you know, I think it's supposed to be 8 participating teams that could rake in like some pretty decent money. You know, not everyone should be making an income being a pro gamer, you know, and already we're at 6. But I think that, you know, my general negativity comes from the fact that, you know, we're basically going from 20 down to 6. And the fact that tier 2 has basically disappeared, which is something that nobody's talking about at all, actually. The fact that tier 2 has just completely disappeared. Tier 2 was there as something that people under the age of Overwatch League requirements could play in before. Now there's nothing for these people, right? Like I saw Tree tweeting about this. Tree, you know, probably one of the best flex DPS players in North America. And he can't even play in this first tournament because he's not 16, 17, however old you got to be, right? So now, even though the grassroots of every esport is kids, you know, kids play the game, for ridiculous amounts of time, and then by the time they're old enough to make semi-responsible or irresponsible decisions for themselves, they go and play games full time as a job. But if you exclude those kids from the pro pathway, you just take away the tier 2 that they were previously participating in, then the long term of the game is similarly fucked. It's just going to be a bunch of boomers competing over the same sack of money over and over again, and the talent pool will go progressively more stale if there's nothing for the young kids to actually compete for and to grind towards.
I feel like in every other game, there's always these pathways, right? Like the number of CS teams who have academy teams or something that pipe like a Na'Vi Junior or whatever they're called to like feed into the main team. Similarly, I guess maybe League did go through a similar transition where their academy scene was torched, but it feels like there has to be something because in so many of these games, how often is the hot new thing, the best player in the world or the best up-and-coming player in the world, some 16-year-old kid or some 17-year-old kid or something?
Doesn't the open circuit mean that tier 2 would be pointless anyway? Like, instead of you competing to be the best contenders team and then hope to get recognized by an Overwatch League team, you actually compete against Overwatch League players. And if you finish top 6 this tournament, you're like, oh shit, he finished top 6. He was carrying. Like, we actually played against him, and then they get picked up themselves. Like, I feel like actually a contenders or a tier 2 scene in a fully open circuit format is totally pointless. Because you can, let's say if you're the best contenders team, what would that make you? That would make you like the 9th best team in a region, like 8th best team in a region. Let's say that you're making it pretty much all the way to grand finals day. And if you have a good tournament or a bad tournament, it goes back. But I feel like actually, if I was a tier, let's say I was W Maimon, right? I'm like this EU contenders player, but I was never quite good enough to make the Overwatch League, but I was always competing relatively high in contenders. Surely this format is way better for me because I get to compete against them straight away. If I do well and if one of the good teams drops a player, I can just immediately, there's way more upward mobility into those top positions which actually get paid. Then in the Overwatch League, you get one at the start of the season. I trial. If I'm playing bad or it's a bad meta or whatever, I don't get it. Then I have to wait 12 months. At least this, in theory, one thing that I feel is inevitable is the top teams are going to have way more roster shuffles in a system that isn't locked into a league format that requires visas, right? Like if the top EU team has a problem and they finish 4th on season, they'll just cut their roster for the next month, like immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's good and bad, right? I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a good thing that there's like less job security for people, but it's good for like the upward mobility, like the merit of it all. But this is also assuming that just because it's open circuit, that the best teams possible are going to form and it's all going to be a meritocracy. And I don't believe that at all. Nobody makes the best teams ever. People always choose to play with their friends, do this, that, the other. People never make the best roster decisions possible to make just the most winningest team ever. In any region, in any game. There's always issues. There's politics, there's friendship, whatever.
Well, that's what we're also going to lose as well with the Orgs going out, right? Like a Florida situation last year is probably now impossible, right? Now a coach and an organization get so much control that they can make these big decisions. I feel like there's maybe, because in theory, especially with the way the system is where you gain, and they've not explained this either, but you get qualification points, right, to make it to grand finals. So if we look at the calendar, the idea is that, well, actually, it makes sense for the team here, if you join a team here, for it to still be the same team the entire time, right? Because you want to keep the team, so you keep the championship points ticking up on the same team. Yeah, this maybe a question of like, how does this work, right, in a situation when there's no job security, potentially very few orgs involved? Who owns the spot? How does the spot transfer? Are people going to start? Because this is what happened in contenders, right?
It's a really good example. Yeah, it's a good point.
You would come through like a team like, what's a good example? Maybe was it 1 point or something? Would be a team of just a group of random Europeans. They do quite well. They get into contenders. They get a contenders spot. And then they sell the spot to an organization, basically. So an organization comes in at the point there's a proven successful team, which I think, to be fair, is quite common in most esports, right? Like if you're a successful team in this open circuit, an org will come in and sign a fully built roster ready to go. But how will that work in this format? Will it be similar to contenders where somebody has to own the spot, and then we get into what we were talking about, right? All these politics and friends and like, this guy's problems. Shit, but his name's on the contract, so he has to be in the team.
Yeah, there's definitely stories of contenders teams who gave the spot ownership to some like Mickey Mouse manager, and then they did all sorts of shit where they just kicked the whole team because they had power, and then Blizzard would have to solve disputes. So It's actually it's actually a good point about who owns the teams, because obviously if orgs come in, if Cloud9 is in and Cloud9 owns the spot, then that's fine, right? We just give it, Jack can run it, and then that's no problem. But in the reality, which is a reality, that the vast majority of these teams are not going to have an org sponsoring them, you do run a real risk of some politics in terms of giving that one person the spot and then kicking the whole team, or everyone. Like if you own the spot but you're the worst player, if the team wants to kick you, you can't, right? Because he's just going to say, okay, I'll leave, but I'm taking the spot. You guys have lost all your championship points. Good luck, you know? And at the same time, with how a lot of these contender teams are run, do not give your spot to one of the managers or one of the coaches of these teams, because that also is so dangerous, you know, because they're equally as incompetent. So that, I actually hadn't considered that, but that's a really good point in terms of that. I guarantee there's drama with that before the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think there just needs to be like way more information for some of this stuff to actually be concrete. But, you know, people definitely need to understand that, you know, like you can completely fuck yourself out of a roster if you don't actually read the rules and understand what you're signing, you know, because with all these tournaments, when you sign up, you know, you're going to be signing up to a rule set essentially, even if you're not signing a contract. And there's going to be some really important detail in there for the implication of everything. And, you know, so I bet a bunch of players not going to read it. They're not going to understand the risks that are going into it. Also, just I'd say that generally the amount of money that an org pays the players, like the staff power is proportionate to that almost, you know? So I do think that now as we go into like the open circuit and whatnot, staff members basically have zero power, you know?
Right.
In Overwatch League, staff had a lot of power, you know? There was probably one person on the team always that had a lot of power, you know? It was the boss of the team, whether it was the head coach or some assistant coach that was strong, or like your general manager, whoever it may be, you know? Every team had someone that was strong. But now that person, I feel like that person kind of doesn't exist anymore, you know? Now the only way that coaches are going to be able to coach players is if they have a lot of buy-in from their players, because now I'd imagine unless orgs are paying heaps and recruiting from the top down, where they recruit a coach and then say, hey, I really trust you, I want you to build everything. If that isn't the way that things are going, the coaches are going to have no power anymore, you know? Yeah. Their power is going to be as strong as they are persuasive with their words, because they're not actually going to be able to impose any meaningful consequences to anyone anymore, because there's no, you know, it's an open circuit. And I'm not going to say that there's anything wrong with that. If anything, I'd say that probably suits the way that I coach a lot better. But you know, just it's something about the circuit that's, you know, perhaps an implication. I do wonder if some of the harsher coaches that people tend to not like and get, you know, potentially ousted later in the year, whether this is actually going to be beneficial to them, because I feel like if they act like a real cunt, then their players can all just be like, you're a cunt. We should get you kicked. Yeah. Like,
well, especially when payment for that coach might actually be coming from a prize pool share. So not only do I hate this guy, but I'm giving him 1/6, 1/7 of my prize money. I can get rid of this guy I hate and I gain $2,000. Seems like a good deal. But
I think that will foster heaps of resentment, knowing that the coaches are getting prize money for sure.
Taking directly out of a player's pocket is like how it'll feel, I think.
Yeah. Also, I think worth saying that the most affected positions are the higher ups ones. Like, I think if you are someone like Albert or Nuki, I feel like being a GM in Overwatch just doesn't exist anymore. You either work like
it's an org job.
If Cloud9 get into it, there will just be someone from the org that sorts it. I feel like the coach should run a lot of the things. The coach can do a lot of the GM responsibilities, and then it'll just be, most rosters will be one coach for 5 players, I think. And I feel like that every Overwatch League GM was someone that worked exclusively for the Overwatch League, right? Like, I think Roston was exclusively doing Fusion. Nuki was exclusively doing Spitfire. I'm guessing Albert was doing exclusively like Florida things. That position is basically eliminated under the new system, because I think there's no way that Cloud9 are going to hire someone. And if you're hiring someone as an employee, you have to actually give them a minimum wage, right? You can't just give them like esports Mickey Mouse bucks. No way they're adding to their budget a full salary for a management position, who will then have to give that money to a coach and then sign the players. So I think, if you're one of the GMs or management positions, I think you are probably affected by this almost more than anybody.
I think it's really common.
All right. Just a quick little jab at Albert before we finish. You know, you were saying that, you know, people like Albert are fucked. And I mean, it's like I saw Albert in his tweet, you know, because literally everyone on planet Earth on the 24th of January decided to post LFT, you know, just make sure that everyone knows you're still unemployed, you know, like no fucking surprises here.
I didn't see Kasaurus's one, actually.
Oddly enough, coaching. He was busy making coaching documents and making bank doing it. But yeah, I saw when he tweeted it, he actually said that he was throwing his hat in the ring to be a head coach. So I do think that that's interesting. That now, like if you were a general manager before, fuck it, now you're a head coach too. I reckon Nookie should just throw in and be like, I'll be a head coach too. Roston should do the same because apparently those skill sets just completely overlap. And if you were a general manager, you can be the head coach too. Fuck it, why not?
From an org's point of view as well, if you have a Counter-Strike team or you have a League of Legends team, these will be your big money-making teams, and it might be you have a lot of dedicated staff for those teams. But if you have a series of smaller teams for games that aren't as successful, you don't hire an individual set of staff. You hire a general manager who might be in charge of 3 of these mid-sized teams or something. You don't hire a dedicated manager. So actually, even if an org comes in, the chance of them actually hiring support staff past a coach and potentially an assistant coach are probably quite slim as well. And I think a lot of these support staff positions, they're going to go, right? It will be like 1 coach per team, and that'll be it. And the coach will be all singing, all dancing. He'll be in charge of logistics. He'll be in charge of liaising with the org. If there is an org, he'll be in charge of all the player recruitment, signing, all of those things. He'll just have to be everything.
Yeah, even someone like Toronto, who we expect to maybe be the biggest spenders, I don't see them hiring a team manager or a general manager. I think they'll just let Kasaurus pick the team and let him run it. Maybe if they have a team house, they need a team manager to look after because gamers will just like burn that shit to the ground. But I think that actually,
I think even that won't happen.
Yeah, I think so. I really think that translators, team managers, general managers, it's all completely gone in Overwatch.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed for I can talk about this, right? I interviewed for Toronto Defiant in the year that Kasaurus got the job, and it's like I was getting interviewed by some guy that didn't know anything about fucking Overwatch. It was some dude that was doing like the parent organization's like European League of Legends stuff, like it was just the general manager for a more successful game interviewing for our game, but he didn't have any knowledge about Overwatch. He was asking me for like professional examples of situations of conflict and stuff like that, and I'm name dropping players and whatnot and trying to like lean into the reputation of different players. And I was like, wait, do you know who I'm talking about? And he's like, no. it's like, oh, okay, cool. So you don't really know a lot about the candidates and whatnot. And then he proceeded to hire the one guy that had an accent from the same side of the world as him. So go figure. But yeah, and coaching documents, of course, and a sick track record. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't even have Microsoft Word installed on my computer right now, so I've got no fucking hope, dude.
Can I sidetrack us a little bit to just say that everyone that was posting LFT is such an outrageous fucking client, no? Like,
yes, 100%.
I mean,
and OG did it twice.
Yeah,
twice.
OG
Yes.
is absolute legend. Do you think any org is like, I'll get into Overwatch? Well, this guy didn't post LFT. Maybe he's contracted somewhere else. They're just going to reach out to you. Like, I feel like the idea that you're LFT, unless you're coming out of retirement or you're already employed somewhere else, I feel like it's so pointless. And what I thought, you saw McGravy doing his tweets. Do you know what I thought the funniest thing ever was when all of the Florida Mayhem, like someone Checkmate did this, him giving them a glowing reference in the quote retweets. Like, oh yeah,
Checkmate was nice for everyone. Gave him great references.
But I'm like, do you think that someone is going to say, the Overwatch League MVP is LFT? Should I sign him? Oh, McGravy says he's pretty good. That's the difference between someone getting an employment or not. Some of these vouchers were so it's so performative, like it's all like so unnecessary. I think like, oh yeah, I just won the Overwatch League. But do you have any references on Twitter from former coach? Oh, you do? Here you go. Here's the bag.
I mean, it's like how many people ever, not just now, have ever been picked up because of their tweet for LFT? It's all about your connections and your reputation as a player, and what you put on twitter.com doesn't fucking matter unless you're a racist and it excludes you from getting a job. Like tweeting LFT is genuinely just wanking yourself off to see how many people can like your tweet. Maybe confirming that you're not dead if you retired, or in OG's case, confirming to everyone that he's not dead once every 16 or so hours.
I was getting worried about him.
If he doesn't post it, I think we should call someone. Like, if it goes like an entire day without him looking for team, we probably should call someone.
Yeah. I feel like if you're posting out retirement or something, or you've just lost your job, then
the change of job one makes sense. I think.
Yeah.
Like Albert's makes more sense, right? Because he's saying, "I will do head coaching."
Yeah.
Like, I'm willing to do different jobs or whatever. But the ones who are just like, "I'm a player. I'm looking for team." It's like, oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just think it's overall like it's just mega self-serving shit, and people just want to see the number go up, and they don't want to feel afraid that they're not going to get a job, so they tweet. They're like, oh, this might not impact it, but I wouldn't want to miss out, right? I wouldn't want to miss out because I didn't tweet LFT. But the reality is, like, you're fucking delusional if you think your LFT tweet is the reason you ever got a job. Like, I would actually genuinely kill to hear one person.
Now, oh, he's LFT. I'll get him. Presumably that's not happening.
No, it's like.
Done off season,
Jack is refreshing Twitter right now. The people that are going to hire you don't even know what Overwatch fucking is. Like genuinely, the people that are going to hire you now, they don't even know what Overwatch is.
Right.
It's going to be that same guy that fucking interviewed me for Toronto, and he's not going to know the name of a single Overwatch player, and he's just going to hire someone that comes from the same side of the world as him. Like that's who's going to get a job nowadays. Like.
Yeah, they'll figure someone, and then they'll talk to that person who's an expert, and then that person will build a team. If they build it around one player or one coach or one whatever it is, that's how it will go. But it will all be relatively contact driven.
To be fair, like if I was Casaurus right now, I think he's probably refreshing Propper's Twitter right now to find out whether or not he's going to be LFT.
I hope he's looking for team. I want to sign him.
Should we contact Proper? And Casaurus is like, hold it.
Wait for the tweet.
I've not seen the tweet.
Tweet is live. Go.
Sick.
Well, we've all done off seasons, right, in the Overwatch League, and we've all obviously tried to sign players in these off seasons. At any point, was your decision changed by what you did or didn't see on Twitter about who you were going to go for or anything?
I have my Maryville job now. The way I got that was I actually just reached out to Maryville and said, "Hey, are you guys looking for a coach, like part-time or full-time?" And they said, "Oh yeah, actually, that's it." Like that. It was none of it was me tweeting. It was me talking to them. Do you know what I mean?
What you've described there, Chris, is how a person in the real world would go about getting a job, where they contact the company either because they've advertised a position, or sometimes you can even contact the company and just ask if there's any position suitable for you. What you've described as a real world thing. If you think in the real world, all you have to do is post on Twitter, "Guys, I'm looking for a job. I work in finance."
LFJ.
Now I just sit back and wait for the banks to call in, and then I'll get a job for a established bank.
That's it. Yeah, that'd be good. Like, I've just lost my job at McDonald's. LFJ, like looking for a job. Anyone know anything? Oh, he's free. No, unfortunately, finding a job involves some more legwork 9 times out of 10.
Well, everyone had their day tweeting, and now it's over. We'll never see it again unless we're following OG.
Nice. Well, it made it feel like the community was alive again, right? Because everyone's tweeting, everyone's posting, everyone's excited to build a team. But and I mean, this is maybe one of the problems as well. Is everyone like Rostermania is going to happen? Well, it's happening, right? So on the day that was posted on the 23rd, there will be a series of conversations going on between everyone trying to assemble the appropriate super team for their region, but what you really want at the same time is the orgs to be involved at this stage.
Well,
but they won't be until there's prize money. I feel like it'd be really risky for an org to get involved now when there's no details of prize money or any in-game collaborations or profit share or anything like that. So
how can orgs make financial decisions if the information about the financials is unannounced? It just doesn't make any sense.
But everyone has to assemble their teams now, or in theory, right? I guess.
I feel like the way it works is this. So a lot of Overwatch players right now are in everybody's DMs and they're crafting their super teams. Saying, "Yeah, I'll play with you. Let's sign this guy. Let's do this." But it's all so fucking pointless because if an org comes in with a contract, wait, I said I was playing with X and Y, but this company wants to pay me to play. Should I stick with this verbal agreement to not get paid, or is the org going to have all of the power? Are we not all chasing employment? So that's all pointless. I think what happens is, I think there is an element where if I'm an organization right now and I'm thinking about getting into Overwatch, everybody is so poor, hungry, and desperate for it. I think the first in the door has a really good chance to lock in some really important pieces of talent. I think if there was a Cloud9 like team that was on the fence, I think there's a real argument that if you get in first, you can just lock up all of the tier 1 talent immediately. And maybe that starts to cause an arm race if other orgs hear that other orgs are looking to do it, because in Overwatch League off-season, the first off, like if LA Valiant offer you 50k in the first day of the off-season, you're going to say, well, I'll wait because I know the off-season, I know there was more teams. But if Cloud9 come in immediately and offer Kevster 2.5k a month, I think the odds of Kevster waiting or not are actually pretty limited. I think you actually have to have pretty big balls of steel to pass up on that initial contract offer to go somewhere else. So from an org's perspective, if they are on the fence, being first through the gates is pretty nice because I think that you can probably get a really solid team potentially for under market value. But yeah, all the players who are crafting their super teams and saying, let's play here, unless you have any finances behind it, you're totally at the whim of an organization coming in and stealing one of your players and being absolutely powerless, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it is basically just like people hedging their bets at best. You know, anyone that's looking to sign a contract right now, you know, they're kind of just like any org that's getting involved right now, you know, they're kind of just gambling on the state of it,
right?
Because unless the orgs know something that the players don't about the amount of money that's going to be up for grabs, right? Unless the publicly available information isn't actually all of the information that can be accessed right now, you know, maybe these orgs actually do know something that others don't. But
it's possible, right?
Kinda,
like presumably if the information is coming next week, that feels like it's relatively finalized. Like there is a number, and if that's the case, then I think that if Faceit know the number, then presumably organizations which work with Faceit or whatever probably have a way of getting said info out.
I guess there's always the outside chance as well that, because I think for a lot of these tier 2 games we've talked about, like Halo is maybe the go-to example, they offer revenue sharing in game, which is part of what makes it a reasonable option for some of the big heavier hitter orgs, because the running cost can be fairly limited because you just hire the players plus a coach. You can get one of your other general managers to do it. Then you get prize money from the majors and you're getting revenue share. So especially if you're a big org like a FaZe or a Cloud9 that are hugely popular, you get lots of money from those in-game sales. And obviously that's something Blizzard have just pretended doesn't exist for their entirety of Overwatch's lifespan. But Microsoft has bought Blizzard. I don't know the details of like where exactly we are in the thing, but maybe that's like very much of a copium category, but maybe there's a doorway there. But that's the sort of thing also that would actually, if that was announced, suddenly loads of orgs who weren't interested before would start at least having a conversation about whether they are interested or not.
Yeah, I feel like there is a like the example I go to is Oxygen Esports, right? Like Oxygen Esports isn't a household name, so the odds of Oxygen Esports buying into the LCS or like a CS:GO team that's really competitive is low. But for an organization like Oxygen that is attempting to grow their way into the scene, I feel like Overwatch could be a really solid starting spot where it's like a tier 2 esport. I can have a team, even if the team is like runs at a slight loss or isn't fully profitable, to establish myself as a household brand. Like, oh, they're the best at Overwatch. I could see that level of org really feeling like Overwatch is a good fit. My feeling is that the really big dogs, like the T1, the Cloud9, the G2, whatever it is, I'd be surprised if they jump in with both feet right away. But I feel like they're like, is it Shopify Rebellion? They have a few teams in like Rocket League and various other games. Orgs like that, I think I could see them getting involved. And maybe one thing that maybe is worth discussing or worth thinking about is how many of these Overwatch, like, because I remember when, you remember Atlanta's goodbye tweet when the Overwatch League was done? They said that, I'm sure they said something along the lines of, we're not done with Overwatch yet or whatever. And Adam, the Toronto guy, has come out and said, yeah, we're going to have an Overwatch team. So I wonder if there is existing Overwatch League organizations that still exist and have enough love for Overwatch that they could consider jumping back in.
I mean, aren't the Boston guys still on contract?
Surely that's over now. There's no way, because I saw Decay and stuff saying LFT, right?
Oh, okay. Well, then they can't be right.
But
I thought they were on contract for the longest time.
If Boston did hold, it was actually, depending on how much it's higher, it could be a good shout right now, right? Like if you had Smurf and Decay held, now could be the time to sign the rest of the boys, and you could create the super team. And this 6-month gamble of signing people for no reason could have paid off. It would always be
the problem is that's not the team for Korea, right? Like, yeah, it's the wrong players. They're too old.
Nah, Smurf is good, dude. Smurf is as good as any.
I'm not saying these guys are bad. These guys are both fucking insane, but they're probably not going to come first.
Building an Overwatch team, the tank I would choose is Smurf. I have too much PTSD from that guy. I would take him over.
You would choose Smurf over someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, maybe really.
I think I might be on the same page. Maybe me and Chris are both suffering from the same form of PTSD.
You fucking London Spitfire, rose-tinted glasses, motherfuckers.
It's
actually crazy.
They must be the best in the world. We only lose to the best.
Unbelievable. Oh my god, he should have us on Orisa 15 times in a row. Decay face fucked us. He needs to be the best player ever. You know, like come on,
Smurf is so good, dude. I'm super Smurf pill.
Smurf's really good.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Does anyone know if Smurf's looking for team?
Oh, wait, I'm checking his Twitter actually.
Right, they're probably turning into glue in the army right now. That guy is so old.
I'm guessing this isn't Smurf. I don't know. I can't find his Twitter. Maybe he's not LFT.
I can only find the Smurf movie.
Oh, good lord.
The movie about the
Are
Smurfs, not the movie coming out, obviously, about Smurf, the Overwatch player.
Are there any other topics for us to cover in this video before this turns into like a full-length podcast?
Yeah, we should not make it too long. I agree.
Yeah, maybe the big missing one that we've not touched on is the China situation, and that how, because of the fact that Overwatch is not currently a distributed game in China, therefore all the Chinese players are not just region locked and have to be imports. They're literally put in the Australia category of don't exist.
The Blizzard segregation camp. But that joke only makes sense if you've seen the Punk episode. But
you actually have to watch the Punk episode, then watch this for that to make sense, which is difficult.
But we're probably going to release this before the Punk episode, so good luck with the continuity there.
So just imagine what I said was funny, guys. Just think about this funny joke. That's it. Like, they're laughing. Trust me, it was good.
I'm glad we've got to the level now. We've reached sort of a Marvel level where someone has to go through and put what order you should watch the episodes in for the continuity to make sense in the Uncoachable universe, so all the jokes land perfectly.
Yeah, I feel like there is obviously the situation with China where there's like legality or like licensing issues. I feel Blizzard is heavily motivated to include China again as soon as humanly possible. I think that the Chinese fan base has been really, really important. I remember a lot of times they would talk about the Overwatch League, and they would say the Chinese teams and the Chinese fans are really, really into Overwatch and carry a lot of the, I don't know if weight is the right word, but they help a lot with the overall success. Like the viewership figures in China were always pretty good. I think that one thing that's interesting is if you say to like a Gushway or a Leave and you say, yo, you have to not do any, you can't play any Overwatch for a year, but maybe in a year you can get back in. Really hard to see if a lot of those top Chinese players, A, can stay at the level they're at now, or B, just don't fully send it and retire. But my feeling is that if Microsoft and Blizzard ever do work this out, I would be surprised if they didn't attempt to make a Chinese scene. I think that every esport should try to include China as much as they can, not just because the Chinese people are wonderful, as I know, but also for the financial reasons, you know.
There's no way your wife gets to this part of the episode, so you say whatever you want.
Oh, no, I'm sticking to what I said.
I think maybe some of the details on this, which I guess are interesting, is that I think a deal in principle is agreed between NetEase and Blizzard. So if you want to release a game in China, you need a distributor, which for Blizzard was always NetEase, until NetEase decided Blizzard were a bunch of pricks and assholes, then cancelled the deal, which is where we find ourselves in this like Overwatchless China situations. But because Bobby Kotick is gone, they're now happy to do business again. What a coincidence. And this now means the game is due to be distributed again. But to be distributed in China, you have to go through the CCP, which to approve a game can take anywhere between 0 time and all of time in existence currently, which is a problem, obviously, if you're someone like Gushway and like maybe want to get the career going again. It's no one from China posted LFT. But what they're trying to do
Jimmy did because he's LFT for the Saudi tournament, because I think the Saudi E-Leagues he might be eligible. So
that
I think
could be the stopgap for people.
Yeah,
good on you, Jimbo.
I think Jimmy's like thinking outside the box.
Good for Jimmy. So what needs to happen for China to rejoin the rest of the Overwatch world is this deal needs to be approved. They're trying to convince them, I think, that they can just use the old deal from before the previous agreement, which I don't think will work. But there's also some new legislation that's been proposed in China that will firstly limit a lot of the loot box stuff and in-game profits, but also gives the CCP a 60-day timeline to approve things. So suddenly, if that goes into practice, the CCP will have to speed this up, and then it means not soon, but partway through the year, China could rejoin the rest of the Overwatch ecosystem, which maybe raises a question for this announcement in terms of how do you slot China into the Asia region? Because you have to take spots away from someone to do that. So that's maybe a problem for the future if they do get it. But I think the impression I get is that China's rejoining is going to happen sooner or later. Potentially this year. It's not a dead forever situation. There's at least there's a pathway to getting them back in.
Yeah. I was boots on the ground in China figuring it out, and I come to the same conclusion.
The only reason Chris came back to the UK is because he actually solved the situation in China.
Big dog. Yeah. I do think that like the uncertainty is a bit of a killer though, for like everyone involved. Like for all of the Chinese players, I feel like it's just going to be like progressively more difficult for them to maintain if they're literally waiting for a completely undetermined date from the CCP in order to determine whether they can actually be pro gamers or not. Like it's the vagueness is a killer, and like you can do something certain with your life, or you can sit waiting for the chance to do something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the only thing is maybe their big streams are big enough where they can be a streamer for a year but then yeah, I don't know. I agree. I think especially for some of those players who've just been around since day one, it looks really hard to see them not trying to spend their life doing something else.
But
I mean, this is very much the value judgment that I've had like for myself, where I think about, like, is it worth it long term? And like for ages I was thinking like, I'll wait for the announcements, I'll see how it's looking and stuff like that. And now, everything's been announced and it just seems like it's the sum of everything. It's currently not worth it. And they're like the numbers aren't even there yet, like they haven't even given the numbers of what it's actually going to be worth from a monetary perspective. And it already looks kind of fucked, at least from my perspective, right? My perspective and your perspective, they're very different, Chris, obviously, because for you, you're more than likely going to be coaching one of those top 2 European teams. So you will be at all of these events, like almost 100%, right? Like every event throughout the year, you'll be there and you'll get a prize split for it. But, if you're someone that's like a tier below in terms of like popularity in the region and whatnot, there's basically only like 4 jobs up for grabs for a Westerner, right? Because I would say that being third place EU, third place NA, it's basically not even worth calling it a job, because I can't imagine you're going to earn enough money for it to be a living.
Yeah, the salary isn't that good unless,
I'd say the salary is probably going to be low, and the prize money is not going to be good because you're third place EU.
It's going to be less guaranteed as well, right? Like I imagine the difference between first place and third place EU is going to be way bigger than the difference between like third, fourth, fifth place EU, right? Like you're going to be in a dogfight for those.
I would think so. And like if you're at that point and that's all of your income, then like it's really you can hardly call it a job anymore, like you're basically gambling on competitive results, and it's just like, I don't know, 26-year-old man with a degree in business allegedly. So I don't know, maybe there's just something else to do with my time.
Next episode,
there's a continuity thing here as well. You guys will get it.
Honestly, it's so funny, guys.
Finish this episode, go watch the Punk one, then come back and re-watch this one.
Yeah.
That's another one that the viewers are going to fucking love for sure.
I want to put the timeline together.
On the rewatch.
Yeah,
I think
actually that could be a Reddit post for us, the Uncoachable joke timeline, as they try and piece it all together. Figure out what the fuck were these guys talking about,
doing?
Yeah.
Someone could make like a supercut where, like someone made the supercut of The Hobbit, where they were like, this is too fucking long to be 3 films, but I'll get all the good bits and put it in order in 1 film. Someone could make a supercut of Uncoachable. I think
know how passionate our fans are.
Very passionate.
I think to add on to Unter's point as well, and not to gas myself and Unter up as well, but I'm probably much more in the Unter situation than Chris is. But I think Chris is in quite a privileged position, maybe alongside Gumba. I mean, Kasaurus as well, because he's already locked it in the big 3, as they will be known. But actually, me and Unter aren't unsuccessful people within the scope of Overwatch League, but the job prospects for us in terms of continuing coaching are not good.
Yeah, what I feel like you would need is that you would really need it to be a thriving EU scene where it becomes like LEC, where there's 5 or 6 salaried positions in each region, and they're all really trying to compete to go to those majors. I think ultimately what needs to happen for more people to get paid is there needs to be some sort of profit model where even if you're a team that isn't successful enough to go to the majors, it's still worth to have an Overwatch team. If that fact becomes true, where, I'll try my best to qualify for Worlds, but if I don't, it's still worth to be a European team in Overwatch, then that's a really good place. But my feeling is much along Max's sentiment, where unless you're one of the really, really big dogs, I think it looks difficult to see it being super worth anyone's time.
See Chris describing himself as a really, really big dog implicitly there, by the way, chat.
I meant teams, big dog teams.
Yes. Little dog.
So yeah, and I think again, if we compare this to other games, there is like an element now. A lot of these majors in other games they're bigger than 8 teams. They're up to like 16 teams or something. And again, you can come last in. You can come 16. You can be the 16th best team at Rocket League Worlds and still get like 12k or something. Mm-hmm. Which again, the problem is as well, Rocket League obviously has the benefit of being a smaller number of players. So you divide that by, 3 players and a coach?
Yeah,
you divide it by 4, suddenly that's like a much bigger share. And then if you get like halfway up the table, we're actually talking pretty decent money. And again, it's just much more regularity, because as much as they say there's these tournaments throughout the year, you know, March and April and May you get a tournament. August, September, well, I guess September, October, November you get tournaments. It's actually only 6 months out of the year. But if you own a house or rent a house or like to eat food, you have to pay for these things 12 months out of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So the money has to actually cover a longer distance than when you get paid.
Unless people just start to do it part-time, you know. But I feel like the thing with a lot of esports players especially is that the idea of part-time is impossible, because they don't want to get a real job, you know. So there'll still be players at this time next year who are doing Overwatch full-time for zero money and just living at home. It'll continue to happen. But obviously for the adults, it's going to be a little bit more challenging.
All right. Unless anyone else has any last thoughts, I think that about sums us up. We'll resume our regular programming in the future, so stay tuned for that with our guests. But yeah, thank you for joining us for this special, and we'll look to probably do more of these when there's a suitable topic of this sort of level, or potentially if there is a follow-on announcement from this that maybe changes things for better or worse. But thank you for watching. We'll play the lip clip out of tradition, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Peace.